Hi, this is Charlotte Pierce. I'm the producer of Common Earth. This is our new podcast about conservation, global conservation, and we are here with one of my favorite conservationists, Manoj Gautam. He's in Kathmandu, Nepal. Hi, Manoj. How are you?
Hi there.
Yeah, I'm glad we have a good connection. That's awesome. And so I'd like to just introduce you a little bit. Like I said, I am Charlotte Pierce, and piercepress.com is my website. So that's my website, and Manoj has his own website because he's one of my authors for Pierce Press, manojgautam.com. And this whole, the big article he wrote about vulture conservation, our topic today, is on that website. It's a really amazing piece, and he'll get into some of the highlights of that. And if we don't have enough time, Manoj, let's just do another episode, because I know there's a lot to say about it. So, so you were born and brought up in a remote village in Western Nepal, which is, what was the name of it? Is the name of it?
It's called Dang.
Dang?
Yeah, Dang is the district. Yeah.
Dang, yeah. And you grew up in a tight-knit community, very much in tune with the natural world around you. And it was also vulnerable to human-wildlife interactions, which is something that you've spent a good portion of your professional life nurturing, dealing with, trying to improve. You're always passionate about wildlife and all animals. You've read about Dr. Jane Goodall at the age of 7, and ever since you've pursued the dream of meeting Dr. Goodall, and you did indeed do that in 2005 when she visited Nepal and responded to one of your emails. I think was that your first email, or was it a handwritten note?
That was the first ever email. My first ever email, and that was addressed to Jane. Of course, somebody else replied to that, and then
I love that story. That's
yeah.
And you were 15, 16 then?
Yeah, something like that. It was at the very early days when email and internet were available, to the general public as a service.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you became a director of the Jane Goodall Institute of Nepal, and had that position for several years, and you've since gone to start your own organization in Nepal. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically, like you said, like since the age of 6 or 7, since I read about Jane in a book, I've been trying to follow her, and it wasn't easy back in those days, coming from where I come from. There were no television channels like National Geographic or Animal Planet, anything like that. I had to lobby later, like in many years later, I had to lobby to get those from the local channel subscriber. So I would just try to follow Jane in any means possible. And like we discussed earlier, first ever email when I came to Kathmandu for my high school, I sent to Jane Goodall Institute addressing Jane, and of course someone else replied, and then they. When they found out about my passion, they offered me membership of Roots in Suits, which is a global youth program that Jane started. And then I was more than happy to be part of the family, and I set it up here in Nepal, became the country coordinator of Roots in Suits, and basically worked on behalf of Roots in Suits for many years before we thought it was time to set up Jane Goodall Institute, and then I led the institute the last year.
Then this with your colleagues at the Jane Goodall Institute, you got involved in this vulture conservation effort. Is that right? Why vultures? Like, why are they important? They get they have a bad connotation, like you call people vultures, and it's not a good thing, but they are a good thing.
To be very honest, I've always been animal lover, like always been fascinated by every single living creature, like good, bad, and the uglies, even though there's no such thing as good, bad, and uglies in the ecological sense. But then we human beings, have our own preferences, very biased. And like the biasness, I was not unique in that regard, because vultures' flight and flying abilities were always a draw. But then at the same time, there's something not so very appealing about them because of the kind of food choices they have.
Food choices, yeah. But that's a critical thing. It's like our sewer system or our composting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like basically Dang, the district, being a massive, the largest actually valley in the region entirely, not just the country. Used to host, a significant population of vultures, because Dang was well-populated place, and because of the, vast alluvial land mass as well, agricultural land mass. People used to have, many livestock, and unlike in Africa, vultures in Asia, they predominantly depend on cattle, livestock, because once they die, they're basically just disposed of, and then that's where the vultures came in. And this trend, the lifestyle of people was also something that was, allowing the vultures to thrive, the population to thrive. So having grown in Dang, we always, vultures were also part of our culture. There are certain festivals like Tihar, which is upcoming now, during the main day of Tihar, which is Baitika. The sisters basically, do some, ritual ceremony.
And this is a long-standing thing.
This is a very long-standing thing. Yeah, this has been centuries old at least.
Wow.
There's more written documentation.
So they celebrate vultures because they do the cleanup.
There are a couple of reasons why vultures hold significance within either mythology or within the religious construct here, and that is because. There are certain anecdotes in the epic Ramayana where Lord Ram, was supported by actually goddess Sita, who was being abducted by Ravana, the demon.
I love these myths.
Yeah, in his flying, Bimana we call it, like the ancient flying, mechanism, whatever that was, flying craft.
Yeah.
Then apparently the story goes as the Jatayu, the king of the vulture, actually intercepted and tried to rescue, Mother Sita, but then Ravana chopped one of his wings, and he was just basically left bleeding on the ground. And when Lord Ram tries to follow the trail, he finds Jatayu, and then Jatayu basically is the one who tells about who is the abductor. So that is how that's one reason why vultures have a significance in our religion.
You were able to tap into that sort of
that came later on. Yes, that came later on
in trying to do this conservation effort, right?
Absolutely, because when we
and just tell people why.
Exactly.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
was we started hearing about significant loss of vulture population, like massive dieback of vultures, and in many cases it was very visible as well. Basically, they were just dropping dead, like left and right from the trees during the flight. In the riverbank in Butwal in the mid 90s, they were dying out in hundreds, thousands even. And there were several factors actually. Initially, back in early 90s, there was this trend of culling, dog culling, like the stray dog population culling, because rabies was a big threat for public health.
Dog culling, did you say?
Yeah, dog culling.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because dogs, stray dogs being the vector of rabies virus, fatal disease. The municipalities did not have any better idea about how to manage that, and they would use strychnine, which is a very serious poison.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So they would basically just give out meat pieces laced with strychnine out to the dogs, and when they die, their disposal was not properly done. They were just basically dumped very openly in the riverbank, especially in Butwal, which is central, you could say, central to Midwestern, somewhere there in that region, a thriving city, and in the riverbank of Tinau River, that's when we started noticing the massive dieback of vultures. And then came the diclofenac, which was basically one of the most efficient. I mean, we humans use that as well as one of the most efficient.
That's an agricultural chemical or medicine?
This is a pharmaceutical chemical, basically. It is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, basically an NSAID group drug, which is very efficient, highly efficient. But then for some reason, it has serious consequences within the raptors system.
And this is all detailed in this article that I just put up the website link. So just if somebody's listening and you didn't understand,
there's ample literature, open literature as well. If you just Google that, you'll get to see. And then there are later, versions of diclofenac, with similar kind of repercussion. Veterinary drug like ketoprofen and others. But so what was basically happening was during the advent of the veterinary, because people used to do very domestic remedies. Like if their livestock or animals got sick, then people would just basically use kitchen remedies, we call it, very herbal kitchen remedies. And advent of mid 90s, people, the livestock service department had these livestock service units in the village level as well, and that was the first introduction to these services to the people. And people, as they started going, one of the most in a survey that we ran in 2005 shows that at least 80 to 86% of the cases that would actually end up in the local livestock service units would be given either bolus, which is the oral form, or injection of diclofenac. That's how much prevalent, because in any kind of ailment, you can imagine there's pain and inflammation is a very common thing, and diclofenac being one of the most efficient drugs. So you can imagine.
So it was human source and agricultural use.
Well, human source would not. Yeah, human source would not, because most of the Nepalese people either bury.
I see. Okay. So it was a agricultural use.
Yeah, it did not. Human side of things did not have any implication on the vultures. But then the major food source for vulture, as we discussed earlier, was cattle and livestock. And when the livestock die, the livestock don't die immediately. So all of a sudden they go through a certain period of illness or not doing so well, during which the treatment happens, and most of those would die during the treatment as well. So if you can imagine, if diclofenac is still in the body system, which takes solid few days at least to get out of the system, if they die during that treatment time, then the diclofenac concentrated form is still in the body, and when they are disposed of, vultures that were still abundant in number would come and basically just clean off the carcass within 20, 30, 40 minutes. And they would come in hundreds of number, and that's how you get poisoned. And somehow diclofenac would cause gout, serious gout, visceral gout, which basically means there would be precipitate of uric acid crystals in their liver and kidneys, which would cause very a severe dehydration, and then they would suffer very slow, painful death because of dehydration. So that's how.
So I want to get into just in the time we have left, how you worked, how you brought the awareness to the community and how you worked with the community, and then what happened with the international organizations.
So when I first heard that they were dying, in that kind of number, then obviously being a conservationist, it was, and I was fairly young as well, like 19 years or so. I was very much concerned, and then I started going to different organizations that were already working, in bird conservation, and shared the idea and concern. And then first time I went to Noel Parasi, which is where we ended up,
Noel Parasi. That's where when I came in 2019, we went to visit.
Yeah. So that was the first ever, vulture restaurant in ever, basically. That was the first model. And when we first visited there they were still, the decent population. Even the Egyptian vultures were, quite fairly, seen or available, which is not the case anymore. Gyps species majorly were abundant still then, even though it was a very critical time already for vultures. But Noel Parasi being a very favorable place for vulture for various reasons, habitat wise and also food availability wise. When I first went there, that's when I got to see this. There's this vulture Gidda Khola, they call it, which basically means vulture river, and they also call it Gidda Khola. Gidda is vulture in Nepalese, and Khola is a stream or like a creek or a river.
Oh, I remember that when we were driving around, see these road signs that says Khola. And exactly. It's a stream. Yes.
Yeah, you still remember. I'm amazed.
I remember. Okay. So
that's the benefit
at this time, just to clarify, this time the vultures were still doing okay, but it was obvious that they were under stress.
Vultures were not doing okay, actually. Vultures had already gone through a significant decline, and the dieback was still happening. It was all still ongoing because diclofenac was still out there at large, and but Noel Parasi still had solid population of vultures, like as compared to any other place that I knew of, at least. It was one of the very few places left where you could just basically make a trip and then would see vultures almost immediately soaring, which used to be the case in entirely throughout the length of the country, whether it's Himalayas, mid hills, lower hills, or the southern plains. But then, by this time, around 2004, 2005, they were fairly limited to certain, pocket areas, and Noel Parasi was one of the prime areas.
Was there an awareness among the villagers or the people?
No. This was very early on. Other than a very few experts and leading organizations, there weren't. It wasn't a public knowledge. I mean, of course, their own indigenous knowledge and their own observation, was there because the decline was significant. And it's one thing that people do not appreciate or comprehend about the magnitude of availability of vultures. They were in millions. They were in millions in South Asian continent, Indian subcontinent. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, included. And so, something that used to be always there, available, soaring, you just look up here, horizon to horizon, and you would not miss, these birds. And all of a sudden, they were just gone and, limited in certain areas. And what the indicators were? The carcasses now would just be rotting for days and weeks, even sometimes, allowing serious manifestation of insect manifestations, jackal and street dog.
So other related problems grew up from this.
Absolutely. And that is exactly why vulture, more than anything else, because we, when we were little kids, since we were little kids, and you as well, actually, we've always read books, we've been taught about the web of life, right? The ecology, how it works. There isn't any other species that I have found in my, entire professional life, or personal life as well, that is so distinctively efficient example that that so efficiently explains the idea of how this ecological web works, and how each and every single we keep saying this, each and every single species is has significance, but vultures were that one species that really one could read that if they don't exist anymore, then catastrophe, public health especially, catastrophe could happen. It was such such a strong example, because bubonic plague outbreak was going really nuts in India. Anthrax was massive threat that was breaking out here and there in many places. And also rabies, because it was allowing, when the vultures don't come and clean up entire 600-pound carcass in few minutes time, 20-30 minutes time, then they would be basically festering for days and days, which attracts all different sorts of vectors and agents like street dogs, jackals, and mongoose, and rats and whatnot, shrews, and all different sort of creatures. And that's where these the vector, the agents, our pathogens are basically exchanged. And this is what makes vultures very clearly and visibly and very comprehensively one of the most efficient sanitation workers of the environment.
There's a reason they exist, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that is.
Let me ask you. What was I going to ask you? Oh, just the transition to the actual Vulture restaurant, which was an original idea that you and your colleagues came up with in collaboration with the community of Noel Parasi, right? Am I right so far?
Yes.
Okay. And so what is a Vulture restaurant? And I remember you told me this before I even went over there, you said, I said, what? Vulture restaurant? What are you feeding the vultures
so
for?
When we use this term Vulture restaurant, the general sentiment that, hits people with is, if the people relate it, the nearest thing people can relate it with, like seafood restaurant or something like that. It's not a restaurant where you eat vultures. But simply, it was a very naively put out term.
But
it's a restaurant.
You were bringing clean carcasses, right?
It is basically the restaurant for the vultures, because like we discussed earlier, the only food source was contaminated, and that is why vultures were dying out in massive number, almost 5% declination in 10, 11 years time. That is the one of the sharpest population declination ever recorded in natural history of a bird that was so abundant. So what we did, the idea was basically we would make sure that two things majorly. One was that the food was available, because also another crisis was that people's behavior were changing. The land use was changing seriously, and then people's tendency to keep livestock, the livestock number were degrading, which is what was compromising the food availability. But then the only source of food was poisoned as well. So the Vulture restaurant was one short answer to both the concerns. That was to make sure that food is available for them, and to make sure that only safe food is available to them. So the general idea was we just went around, miking, talking to people, pamphleting around in the entire, villages, and then let people know that, guys, if your livestock dies, then let us know, because it's quite
and
a scene.
They did that. They actually did
that, of course, because it would be quite a situation for people to deal with a dead carcass in their cow shed. They would have to carry it and then find a tractor or something like that. And what we did was we assisted them in the beginning.
Yeah.
We told them, listen, call us and we'll help you. And in return, what we did, every time we started getting calls, we would go attend the call, and then we would basically interrogate them. What was the cause of the death? If
so
found
you
natural,
tested the animals, or did you just?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have means for chemical analysis and all that kind of razzle dazzle thing, but it was because it was very simple village setup, so it wasn't that difficult to figure out what was the cause of the death. We would also look for the medical history or anything like that, and in case it was poisoned or in case it was contaminated, we made sure that it's buried and it's out of the access of vultures. Otherwise, we would just basically take it to this platform, which was the Vulture restaurant, and then there was another guy who we had partnered, the skin dealing guy. And he would basically just deal with the hide, open it, and then make it easy for the vultures. And he would sell this hide for about $6. He would take $3. He would give us $3, and that $3 would be used to further attend another call. So that is how and the local
it's just like little steps, but in a constant.
Most sustainable way, financially sustainable, energy-wise sustainable. It made sense because there was already need for people to dispose of their carcass, and all they needed to do was do it in a manner that's safe for the vultures. It's a win-win, and they understood that. And
were you working with the government at this point, or the local community?
Very initially, it was the local people, which was not very easy to convince them, because culturally, again, we talked about religious earlier, but then culturally, it was also a challenge, because vultures were not very liked by the local people, because they eat cows, and cows are holy. So cows eating dirty. If a vulture roosts on your rooftop, then you have to basically break all the floors, a hole that's about 1 foot by 1 foot kind of thing, all the way to the place where the vultures had roosted, and then organize a very expensive puja, this ritual thing.
Sure.
And nobody wanted that, so people would shoo these vultures away, and that's why would not let any big simul tree, very highly preferred tree by vultures. And from that to using these religious sentiments, using the ecological logic, we had to work hard, but then the community got it, and they were absolutely on board. And slowly their identity, this is small little village of Basa Basai, started.
I remember you telling me about that. Yeah,
exactly. You've been there. Yeah. And an entire village became my little my second family. And then we would work day and night, discuss, plan. And that's how it went into a whole another level and got that recognition of being the vulture capital of Nepal.
But the municipal or the regional conservation authorities, were they on board with this as well? Or
so I mean, it was just a very initial phase, and then came there was a Bird Conservation Nepal, big ornithological leading organization, and then they basically replicated the idea in Pitoli, which still goes on. They did it in many other places as well. Some of them are still sort of working. Many of them are not working, unfortunately. But the idea was replicated. The idea has been replicated in many other countries as well. Something that started from a 19 years old mind and in a little village with little community support has now become like a beacon in the field of conservation, which gives us immense satisfaction. And then rest is history basically. Because and till the date, there have been so many, millions of dollars of investment in breeding programs and this and that, research. But there is hardly anything that is that has yielded more than the simple concept of a vulture restaurant. And in the initial days, even the experts would like kind of discredit this. This is my personal experience of based on personal discussion with them.
So they didn't give credit to the sort of organic.
Well, obviously, we didn't get the credit because the credit was bagged by so many. There were always new people popping up claiming that that's not what matters, though. As long as.
But do you feel like the idea has improved?
The idea has gotten credential as an efficient idea. There's no doubt about it.
Perfect.
Which is why there are popping up figures, people claiming this idea that as if they came up with it. Which is there's no contest here, as long as they do it in real terms. But then at the same time, there are so many other distractions. Like I said, people discredit experts in the very initial phase would try to discredit it, saying like, yeah, but the success is only in very limited in pocket areas. Of course, because these are pocket initiatives. Why not replicate this and make it wider rather than stealing wild breeding pairs from the wild, and bringing them in little enclosures, and then which.
So was the breeding program? It extracted breeding pairs from the wild.
Absolutely.
And then they weren't there to create a wild population, right?
They still aren't, and the very little insignificant number since then, since 2008 onwards, have been released back in the wild, despite the immense expenses and this and that, and also in situ situation. If you don't improve the in situ situation, we have. See, this is the thing, we replicate, we copy because things are sexy and glamorous, which is, I believe, this breeding program was copied from Californian condors experience. But then one of the major things that we know from Californian condors was the lead poisoning, among the hunted and shot animals. Is that if you cannot sort out the in situ situation, then there's no point in reintroducing the captive bred ones, because they will not be able to survive. Same reason why the millions and millions of the population of the vultures, many species of vultures, died at the first place. So there's no point in focusing on breeding and reintroduction if you cannot sort out the in situ situation. So my focus has always been to in the ground, in the real ground, in the real habitat, where we need to take the threats away from the real ground, from the real habitat, rather than focusing on somewhere else. There's no point in making balls of feathers and bones and meat. We need efficient scavengers, that can play the role of nasal sanitizer.
So we have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to ask you where this effort is now and where you are placing your emphasis in conservation in Nepal or elsewhere.
One thing that happens is, this is why I wrote the article recently, because what happened was Basa Basai was very unfairly, robbed from the credit that they deserve, because it took away that natural enthusiasm, their sense of pride.
It's like, what the heck? Where's
exactly? Yeah. Because in 2010, when we organized that first, Vulture Conservation Festival, it saw, in a place where barely anybody, visited, it saw a mass participation of more than 18,000 people gathered in one place, for 3 or 5 days. The entire villages, not only Basa, and there was a little rift between Basa and Basai village, both came together, worked hand in hand in celebrating, vultures conservation awareness. And it was a massive celebration too. Sitting ministers visited, and that's how the enthusiasm, we had worked so hard on increasing the enthusiasm among the local people. Hundreds of women and men participated in it spontaneously. And when you rob that kind of credential from them, then that can kind of lower the motivation, and that's exactly what happened. So we saw like a drop in
they just said, well, what happened to our initiative?
Exactly. So that foul playing is also something that I would like to bring into people's attention and concern body's attention, because one my idea about conservation is that many times it is possible, many other times it might not be possible. Desperate times, desperate measures, but most of the time the conservation is very much dependent on lifestyle of people. If people abide by certain lifestyle, then conservation becomes a part of lifestyle. Conservation is nothing but the byproduct of a responsible living. If people choose not to abide by that, then there's a crisis. And rather than turning conservation into an exotic foreign business, fed by dollars from somewhere else, which is necessary at times, and I admit that.
Yeah,
we do.
yeah.
We all do that. But then, as far as possible, why don't we try to keep it grounded? Why don't we try to keep it grounded, make it as less laborious, labor extensive as possible, and use our creativity and strategic manners to somehow entwine people's lifestyle with, like we did, and again, in many other versions of now, like current day Vulture restaurant, you will see people gathering, hoarding, street animals from here, there, keeping them for ages, feeding hay where they don't, like often get to have an access to green grass or anything like that, almost like killing livestock for vultures, which is more expensive, laborious, this, and limited as well. Whereas if you tap onto the natural resource, that natural source of the carcasses, which is the general villages, basically, people's lives, households, then there's no limit. Limit is the number of the livestock.
It's got a solid foundation. Yeah.
Exactly. And then really, less labor and cost effective, less labor intensive and very cost effective. And which is why now, after all these many years of gap, because I was all over the place in Oxford, I had to continue my further studies and consolidate my ideas and approach as well. Now what we're doing is we're working together with the local government, because now post-federalism, Nepal has recently gone into federalism, the power devolution and power decentralization has kind of been realized to its truest meaning, and the local municipal entities are also more aware about conservation and this and that. So we're trying to work with them and spread it out, and again reinforce the idea of Vulture restaurant, and make the best of it.
Well, I think next time you come on, I'd like to talk about that community-based conservation concept that you have done extensive field research and other types of research and thought on. So I think it's just, I think it's the future of conservation and preservation of our species and our planet. So, because we live here too,
Exactly.
So thank you so much. And
because of the services that these amazing creatures like vultures provide.
Yeah. Well, and we are a little bit over, but can you come back in a couple of weeks and we'll continue the conversation?
I would love to. Absolutely. Right. Let's continue.
I'm so happy. Thank you, Manoj. And all the way from Kathmandu,
absolutely,
to the ends of the earth. Take care. Bye. This is Charlotte Pierce and Manoj Gautam coming at you from Boston and Nepal. Bye.